The gunshots still echoed in Hannah James' ears as she watched her husband's wagon disappear over the horizon, leaving nothing but dust and betrayal in its wake. Clutching her 3-month-old daughter Emma to her chest, Hannah fought back tears as she surveyed what remained of her life, a broken-down wagon with a shattered wheel, a meager supply of provisions, and the vast, unforgiving Wyoming Territory stretching endlessly around her in the summer of 1876. "Hush now, little one," Hannah whispered, gently rocking Emma, who had begun to whimper. "Everything will be all right." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Thomas had abandoned them after their argument about heading further west. He'd taken the horses, most of their supplies, and left them with a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. Hannah adjusted her worn calico dress and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. At 22, she'd already endured more hardship than most women twice her age. Orphaned at 16, married at 19 to a man who promised adventure and security, and now abandoned with an infant on the frontier. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Hannah fashioned a small shelter using a blanket and the side of the wagon to shield Emma from the heat. Their water supply would last 3 days at most. After that, Hannah refused to complete the thought. She busied herself taking inventory of what remained: some hardtack, dried beef, a small sack of beans, 2 blankets, her sewing kit, a cooking pot, a knife, and Thomas's old rifle with exactly 6 bullets. Not enough to survive long, but perhaps enough to flag down help if any came. As dusk approached, Hannah built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled. The vast prairie grew eerily quiet as darkness fell, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant coyote. Emma slept peacefully in a makeshift bed inside the wagon, unaware of their dire circumstances. Hannah kept the rifle across her lap as she stared into the flames. "I will not die here," she whispered to herself. "We will not die here." The night passed slowly, with Hannah drifting in and out of fitful sleep. Every sound, the whisper of wind through prairie grass, the scurrying of small nocturnal creatures, jolted her awake, rifle at the ready. Dawn broke with harsh clarity, revealing their predicament in the unforgiving light of day. Hannah fed Emma and changed her, rationing their water carefully. She decided to walk a short distance to see if she could spot any signs of civilization, but the endless rolling prairie offered no comfort. By noon of the second day, Hannah had begun to ration the water more severely. The heat was unbearable, and flies buzzed incessantly around them. Emma grew fussy, her small face reddening from the heat despite Hannah's best efforts to keep her cool. It was during the third day, as Hannah was contemplating using one of her precious bullets to signal for help, that she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks, conjuring sounds of rescue from desperation. But the rhythm grew louder, more distinct. Hannah scrambled to her feet, clutching Emma to her chest with one arm, while shading her eyes with the other. A lone figure on horseback approached from the east, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Hope and fear battled within her. The frontier was no place for trusting strangers, but without help, she and Emma would surely perish. Hannah reached for the rifle, keeping it visible but not aimed as the rider approached. The man slowed his horse as he neared, and Hannah could make out his features, now tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, not the flashy attire of an outlaw. His mount, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted and pawed at the ground. "Afternoon, madam," the stranger called, keeping a respectful distance. His voice was deep, with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas. "Good afternoon," Hannah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her parched throat. The man's eyes took in the scene quickly: the broken wagon, the makeshift camp, the infant in her arms, and the conspicuous absence of any man or horses. "Seems you've found yourself in a difficult spot," he observed, dismounting with fluid grace. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair with hints of sun-bleached brown. His eyes, keen and alert, were the color of a summer storm. "My husband left," Hannah said simply, seeing no point in pretense. "Took the horses. Wheel broke." She gestured to the wagon, where the wooden wheel lay splintered beyond repair. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Left you and the little one alone? Out here?" Disbelief and something harder edged his words. Hannah merely nodded, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. Emma began to fuss, sensing her mother's distress. The stranger approached slowly, hands visible. Name's Mason Steele. I've got a ranch about 15 miles east of here. Hannah James. This is my daughter, Emma. Mason glanced at their meager supplies, then at the vast emptiness surrounding them. His expression softened as he looked at the infant. Mrs. James, he said firmly, decision made. You can't stay here. No settlements for 40 miles in any direction. No water source nearby. He paused, then added with quiet authority, You're mine now. Hannah stiffened, clutching Emma tighter. Mason immediately realized how his words had sounded. Forgive me, madam. Poor choice of words. He removed his bandana and wiped his brow. What I mean is, I'm taking responsibility for getting you both to safety. My ranch has plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, would welcome the company. Hannah hesitated, weighing her options. This man seemed honorable enough, but the frontier was full of stories about women who trusted too easily. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Steele, but, Mrs. James, Mason interrupted gently. I understand your caution, but your little one needs shelter and proper care. I swear on my mother's grave, I mean you no harm. His eyes held steady on hers. You can keep that rifle pointed at me the whole way if it makes you feel safer. Emma began to cry in earnest now, her tiny face scrunched in distress. Hannah knew she had no real choice. Very well, Mr. Steele. We accept your help. Relief flashed across Mason's face. Good. Let's gather what we can salvage and be on our way before sundown. Mason worked efficiently, helping Hannah collect her belongings. He examined the wagon carefully, salvaging what could be useful. Was there anything valuable in here? He asked. Hannah shook her head. Thomas took anything worth selling. Mason's expression darkened at the mention of her husband, but he said nothing. Once they had packed Hannah's meager possessions into Mason's saddlebags, he fashioned a sling from a blanket so Hannah could carry Emma securely against her chest. Then he helped her mount his horse, adjusting the stirrups for her smaller frame. I'll walk alongside, he explained, taking the reins. It's not too far. As they set off eastward, Hannah felt a complex mixture of gratitude, apprehension, and something else she couldn't quite name. Emma had settled against her chest, lulled by the gentle motion of the horse. May I ask what brings you out this way alone, Mr. Steele? Hannah asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Checking fence lines, Mason replied. Got a herd of cattle grazing about 5 miles back. Been having trouble with wolves lately. He glanced up at her. Lucky for you I chose to ride this direction today. Lucky indeed, Hannah thought. Or perhaps providential. Her father, a minister before his death, would have called it God's hand. Hannah wasn't sure what she believed anymore, but she was grateful nonetheless. As they traveled, Mason pointed out landmarks and shared bits of information about the territory. Hannah learned he had established his ranch 5 years earlier after working cattle drives from Texas. It's good land, he said with quiet pride. Good water, good grass. Starting to build something real there. You're not married? Hannah asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Mason didn't seem to mind. No, madam. Been too busy building the ranch to court properly. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Mrs. Calloway says I'm too particular, but I figure when it's right, it's right. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple. Hannah could make out a sturdy main house built of logs with a stone chimney, a large barn, and several outbuildings. It wasn't grand, but it was well maintained and spoke of care and hard work. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house short, plump, and gray-haired, wiping her hands on her apron. Mason Steele. I was beginning to worry. She stopped short at the sight of Hannah and the baby. Well, land's sakes, what have we here? Mrs. Calloway, this is Mrs. Hannah James and her daughter Emma, Mason explained, helping Hannah dismount. Found them stranded with a broken wagon. Her husband left them. Mrs. Calloway's face registered shock, then outrage, then settled into determined compassion. Merciful heavens, bring them in this instant. Poor dears must be half dead with thirst and hunger. Hannah found herself swept into the house by Mrs. Calloway's efficient care. Before she knew it, she was seated at a solid wooden table with a cup of sweet tea in front of her and Emma being cooed over by the older woman. Such a beautiful child, Mrs. Calloway murmured, expertly cradling Emma. And quiet as a mouse after what you've been through. She's got spirit, this one. Mason had disappeared to tend to his horse, giving Hannah time to adjust to her new surroundings. The house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful rag rugs covering the plank floors. A fire burned low in the stone fireplace despite the summer heat, keeping a pot of something savory smelling warm. Mrs. Calloway bustled about, preparing a plate of food for Hannah: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread with butter. The sight and smell made Hannah realize how hungry she truly was. Eat up, dear, the housekeeper encouraged. You need your strength, especially if you're nursing this little angel. Hannah ate gratefully, while Mrs. Calloway continued to fuss over Emma. The older woman's kindness brought tears to Hannah's eyes, tears she'd been too proud and frightened to shed in the wilderness. There, Mrs. Calloway said softly, noticing Hannah's emotion. You're safe now. Mr. Steele is a good man, the best I know. Nobody will harm you or your little one here. When Mason returned, he had changed into a clean shirt and washed the dust from his face and hands. He accepted a plate from Mrs. Calloway with thanks and sat across from Hannah. I've prepared the guest room for Mrs. James and the baby, Mrs. Calloway informed him. And drawn water for a bath. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway, Mason replied. You're a godsend as always. After dinner, Hannah bathed and changed into a nightgown Mrs. Calloway provided, slightly large but clean and soft. Emma, freshly washed and wrapped in a soft blanket, fell asleep almost immediately in the cradle Mason had carried in from the attic. It was mine when I was a baby, he explained somewhat sheepishly. My parents brought it all the way from Tennessee. Been stored away all these years. Hannah ran her fingers along the smooth wooden edge of the cradle. It's perfect. Thank you. Left alone in the comfortable guest room, Hannah stood by the window, looking out at the stars that seemed impossibly bright over Mason Steele's ranch. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to think beyond immediate survival. What would become of her and Emma now? They couldn't impose on this stranger's kindness indefinitely. Tomorrow, she decided, she would discuss options with Mr. Steele. Perhaps he knew of a town nearby where she could find work. With her sewing skills, she might be able to support herself and Emma. As Hannah drifted off to sleep, she realized she hadn't thought about Thomas all evening. Somehow, that seemed significant. The next morning, Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the unfamiliar sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment, disorientation gripped her before she remembered where she was. Emma still slept peacefully in the cradle. After dressing in her own freshly washed dress that Mrs. Calloway must have tended to while she slept, Hannah made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Calloway was already there, kneading dough at the table. Good morning, dear. Sleep well. The older woman beamed. Better than I have in months, Hannah admitted. Is there something I can help with? You can sit and have some breakfast first, Mrs. Calloway insisted, gesturing to a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits keeping warm on the back of the stove. Mason's been up since dawn. He's out with the hands, but said he'd be back mid-morning to speak with you. Hannah ate her breakfast and then insisted on helping with the household chores. She needed to feel useful, to repay some small part of the kindness she'd been shown. By the time Mason returned, Hannah had helped with the bread making, assisted in hanging laundry, and learned the layout of the main house. Mason found her in the kitchen, Emma contently cradled in one arm, while Hannah chopped vegetables for the midday meal with her free hand. Mrs. James, he greeted her, removing his hat. I hope you rested well. Very well, thank you, Hannah replied, noticing how the morning sun highlighted the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Mr. Steele, I wanted to discuss what happens next. I'm grateful for your hospitality, but I can't impose indefinitely. Mason pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for Hannah to do the same. Mrs. Calloway tactfully found a reason to step outside. I've been thinking about that, Mason said once Hannah was seated. The nearest town is Cottonwood Springs, about 20 miles east. It's small but growing. They have a general store, a church, even started a school last year. Hannah nodded, calculating possibilities. Do you know if they need a seamstress? I'm quite skilled with a needle. Mason looked thoughtful. They might. Mrs. Peterson, who did most of the sewing, passed last winter. He hesitated, then continued. But before you decide on that, I have another suggestion. Hannah waited, curious. Stay here, Mason said simply. At least through the summer and fall. Winter comes harsh in these parts, not a good time to be sitting up alone with a little one. I couldn't possibly, Hannah began. You wouldn't be idle, if that's your concern, Mason continued. Mrs. Calloway isn't getting any younger, and she's mentioned wanting help with the household. The ranch is growing, and so are the responsibilities. You'd earn your keep and have a safe place for Emma. Hannah considered his offer. It made practical sense, and the thought of trying to establish herself in a strange town before winter was daunting. What about after winter? She asked. Mason met her gaze steadily. By then, you'll know the territory better. You can make a more informed decision about what's best for you and Emma. Hannah recognized the logic of his proposal. Very well, Mr. Steele. We'll stay until spring, if you're certain. Relief crossed his features. I am. And please, call me Mason. Then you must call me Hannah. A smile spread across his face, transforming his serious expression. Hannah it is. Life on the Steele ranch quickly fell into a rhythm. Hannah took over much of the cooking and household management, freeing Mrs. Calloway to focus on her famous preserves and baking. Emma thrived in the stable environment, growing chubbier and more alert each day. Mason was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each evening to sit with Hannah on the porch after supper, talking about the day's events or sometimes just watching the sunset in comfortable silence. Hannah learned he had built the ranch from nothing after winning a poker game that gave him enough money for a small herd and the land claim. It was luck and foolishness, he admitted one evening. But sometimes that's what a man needs to find his purpose. Hannah shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her father's small church, and her mother's garden. She spoke less of Thomas, though Mason never pressed for details. As summer gave way to autumn, Hannah noticed subtle changes in her relationship with Mason. His gaze lingered longer when she entered a room. He found reasons to be near the house during the day. Small gifts appeared: a ribbon for her hair, a wooden rattle for Emma, wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. For her part, Hannah caught herself watching for his return each day, taking extra care with meals she knew he favored, and enjoying their evening conversations more than she cared to admit. Emma, now crawling and babbling, lit up whenever Mason entered the room, reaching for him with chubby hands. She's taken quite a shine to him, Mrs. Calloway observed one afternoon as they watched Mason showing Emma a butterfly in the garden. And he to her. Hannah nodded, unable to deny the truth of it. He's been very kind to us. Mrs. Calloway gave her a knowing look. It's more than kindness, dear. I've known that man for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you and that child. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. It's too soon, she murmured. And complicated. Life is complicated, Mrs. Calloway replied sagely. Doesn't mean you stop living it. The harvest season brought new activities to the ranch. Hannah helped with preserving vegetables from the garden and making apple butter from the small orchard Mason had planted when he first arrived. The days grew shorter and the evenings cooler. One crisp October evening, Mason invited Hannah to ride with him to check on a new calf born the previous day. Mrs. Calloway offered to watch Emma, and Hannah found herself alone with Mason for the first time since he'd found her on the prairie. They rode side by side. Hannah now comfortable on horseback after Mason had patiently taught her to ride during the summer months. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they crossed a meadow dotted with late blooming wildflowers. You've changed this place, Mason said suddenly. Hannah looked at him questioningly. How do you mean? Before you came, it was just a ranch, land, cattle, work to be done. He gazed across the rolling hills. Now it feels like a home. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Hannah. You gave us a home when we had none, she replied softly. I can never repay that kindness. Mason reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her. I don't want repayment, Hannah. That's not what this is about. Hannah's heart quickened at the intensity in his eyes. What is it about then? I think you know, he said quietly. I think you've known for some time now. Hannah looked down at her hands on the reins. Mason, I'm still married, even if Thomas abandoned us. I know, he acknowledged, and I respect that. But I also know what I feel, and I think I hope you might feel something too. Hannah raised her eyes to his. I do, she admitted, but it frightens me. Mason's expression softened. We have time, Hannah. I'm not asking for promises. Just honesty between us. Honesty, Hannah repeated. I can offer that. She took a deep breath. The truth is, I care for you more than I should, given my circumstances. Emma adores you, and the thought of leaving in the spring. She faltered. Then don't, Mason said simply. Stay? Not as my housekeeper or as a charity case. Stay because this is where you belong, you and Emma. Before Hannah could respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. One of Mason's ranch hands approached, looking worried. Mr. Steele? Riders coming, looks like trouble. Carson spotted them from the north ridge. Mason's expression hardened instantly. How many? 3, sir. One of them matches the description of that fella Hughes warned us about, Thomas James. Been asking about a woman and baby at settlements all through the territory. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas. Here. Mason turned to her, his voice low and urgent. Hannah, ride back to the house. Tell Mrs. Calloway to take Emma to the root cellar. Stay with them. Mason, no, Thomas is dangerous when he's angry, Hannah protested. I can handle him, Mason assured her. Go now, please. Hannah hesitated only a moment before turning her horse toward the ranch. As she galloped back, fear and confusion warred within her. Why had Thomas returned? After months of absence, what could he possibly want? When she reached the house, Hannah quickly relayed Mason's instructions to Mrs. Calloway, who immediately gathered Emma and a few supplies. What about you, dear? The older woman asked as they hurried toward the root cellar behind the kitchen. I need to know why he's here, Hannah replied, her jaw set determinedly. I need to face him. Mason won't like that, Mrs. Calloway warned. I know, but this is my battle. Hannah kissed Emma's forehead. Keep her safe. After making sure Mrs. Calloway and Emma were securely hidden in the root cellar, Hannah retrieved the rifle from above the fireplace and stepped onto the porch just as 4 riders approached Mason, his ranch hand, and 2 strangers. One of the strangers was unmistakably Thomas, his lean frame and sandy hair instantly recognizable despite the months that had passed. Hannah descended the porch steps, rifle held ready but not aimed. Mason noticed her immediately, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. Hannah, Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the yard. There you are, my dear wife. I've been searching high and low for you and my son. Daughter, Hannah corrected coldly. Emma is a girl, Thomas. Not that you stayed long enough to notice. Thomas dismounted, ignoring Mason's warning to stay where he was. A simple mistake, easily forgiven, just as I'm willing to forgive your temporary living arrangement. His gaze slid dismissively over Mason. Gather your things. We're leaving. Hannah stood her ground. I'm not going anywhere with you, Thomas. You abandoned us to die in the wilderness. Nonsense, Thomas scoffed. I merely went ahead to secure opportunities. I always planned to return. After 3 months? Hannah's voice rose incredulously. You left us with a broken wagon, almost no supplies, and rode away with everything of value. The man accompanying Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Mason and his ranch hand remained mounted, positioned between Thomas and the house. Mr. James, Mason said, his voice controlled but edged with steel, your wife and daughter have made their home here. They're under my protection. Thomas's face darkened with anger. Your protection? She's my wife. He took a step toward Hannah, but stopped when she raised the rifle. Not anymore, Hannah stated firmly. You forfeited any claim to us when you left us to die. The law says differently, Thomas sneered. A woman can't just decide she's not married anymore because her husband had a moment of poor judgment. Perhaps not, came a new voice. Everyone turned to see a man in a dusty black suit riding up the lane. But abandonment is grounds for divorce in Wyoming Territory, as is failure to provide. Judge Parker, Mason acknowledged with surprise. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. The judge, an older man with a trim white beard, dismounted stiffly. Finished my business in Cottonwood Springs early and thought I'd ride out to discuss that land deal. Seems I've arrived at an opportune moment. He turned his shrewd gaze on Thomas. Young man, I presume you're Thomas James? Thomas straightened, attempting to appear respectable. I am, Your Honor. I've come to reclaim my wife and child who've been kept from me. Judge Parker raised his eyebrows. Interesting choice of words. Reclaim. A man reclaims property, Mr. James. Women and children are not property. He turned to Hannah. Mrs. James, Would you be willing to give sworn testimony regarding your husband's abandonment? I would, Your Honor, Hannah replied without hesitation. The judge nodded. Then, as circuit judge for this territory, I can hear your petition for divorce immediately, if that's your wish. Thomas lunged forward. This is absurd. You can't just, I can and I will. Judge Parker interrupted sharply. The law exists to protect the innocent, Mr. James, not to enable men who abandon their families to the mercies of the wilderness. For several tense moments, Thomas stood seething, his eyes darting between Hannah, Mason, and the judge. Finally, his companion called out, Come on, Thomas. This isn't worth getting arrested over. This isn't over, Thomas growled, but he backed toward his horse. Actually, it is, Judge Parker said firmly. Mrs. James will file her petition. You will receive notification of the proceedings, and if you attempt to interfere or threaten her in any way, you'll face charges. Do I make myself clear? Thomas glared, but nodded curtly before mounting his horse. With a final venomous look at Hannah and Mason, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his companion following. The tension in the yard dissipated slowly. Mason dismounted and moved to Hannah's side, gently taking the rifle from her trembling hands. Are you all right? He asked softly. Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Relief, fear, and hope collided within her in a confusing tumult. Judge Parker approached them. I apologize for the unorthodox introduction, Mrs. James. Richard Parker, circuit judge. He offered his hand, which Hannah shook gratefully. Thank you, Your Honor. Your timing was providential. Indeed, the judge agreed. Now, if you're serious about filing for divorce, we can begin the paperwork this evening. Wyoming Territory has some of the most progressive laws regarding women's rights. Your case seems straightforward, especially with witnesses to the abandonment. Hannah glanced at Mason, who gave her an encouraging nod. Yes, I would like to file immediately. As the sun set over the Steele ranch that evening, Hannah sat at the kitchen table with Judge Parker, providing details for her divorce petition. Mason had gone to release Mrs. Calloway and Emma from the root cellar, and they now sat in the parlor, Emma contentedly playing with wooden blocks Mason had carved for her. One last question, Mrs. James, Judge Parker said, setting down his pen. Given the circumstances, would you wish to revert to your maiden name once the divorce is finalized? Hannah considered this. No, Your Honor. For Emma's sake, I think it best we share a surname. The judge nodded understandingly. Very well. I'll file these papers when I return to Cheyenne next week. Given the clear evidence of abandonment, I anticipate the divorce will be granted without complication. After the judge retired to the guest room Mason had prepared, Hannah joined Mason, Emma, and Mrs. Calloway in the parlor. Emma immediately crawled to her, babbling happily. She wasn't troubled at all by the excitement, Mrs. Calloway reported. Brave as can be, just like her mother. Hannah hugged Emma close, breathing in her sweet baby scent. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Standing your ground despite fear is the very definition of courage, Mason said quietly. He hesitated, then added, I'm proud of you, Hannah. Later, after Emma was asleep and Mrs. Calloway had retired, Hannah and Mason sat on the porch swing, a lantern casting a warm glow around them. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. What you said earlier today, Hannah began tentatively, about staying because this is where Emma and I belong. Mason turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I meant it. Hannah took a deep breath. When Judge Parker asked about my name, I almost said. She paused, gathering her courage. I almost said I'd like to be Hannah Steele someday. The hope that blazed in Mason's eyes made her heart swell. He took her hand gently in his. Hannah, I've known since the day I found you that you were meant to be in my life. I don't need to rush you, and I understand there are proper ways to do things. But when the time is right, I want nothing more than for you and Emma to share my name and my life. Hannah felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. I think I've been falling in love with you since you said you're mine now, even though I was too afraid to admit it. Mason chuckled softly. Not my smoothest moment, but honest, Hannah replied. And everything that's followed has shown your true character. She squeezed his hand. Emma already loves you. And I. She met his gaze steadily. I love you too, Mason Steele. Mason's smile was radiant in the lantern light. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers in a gentle, reverent kiss their first. It was brief, but filled with promise. "I love you, Hannah James," he whispered against her lips. "You and Emma both. And I swear I'll spend every day making sure you never regret choosing to stay." Spring came to the Wyoming Territory with a riot of wildflowers and new life. The divorce had been granted without complication, Thomas having failed to contest it after Judge Parker's stern warning. Emma had taken her first steps during the winter, toddling directly into Mason's waiting arms while Hannah watched with joyful tears. On a perfect May morning, with the mountains visible in the distance and meadowlarks singing in the cottonwoods, Hannah James became Hannah Steele in a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Collins from Cottonwood Springs. Emma, now 15 months old and dressed in a white dress Hannah had lovingly sewn, was passed between Mrs. Calloway and Judge Parker during the vows. "I knew you were mine from the moment I saw you with that broken wagon," Mason whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife on the freshly swept porch. "Not as a possession, but as the missing piece of my heart." Hannah rested her head against his chest. But for Hannah and Mason, the world had narrowed to just the three of them, Hannah, Mason, and little Emma, who squealed with delight as Mason swept her up to join their dance. 2 years later, Hannah stood on that same porch, watching Mason teaching 3-year-old Emma to ride her own pony in the yard. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of the new life within a boy, according to Mrs. Calloway's confident prediction. The Steele Ranch had prospered, expanding to include more cattle, improved buildings, and even a small schoolhouse that served the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. Hannah had started a vegetable garden that was the envy of the territory and established a small business selling her fine needlework to merchants in Cheyenne. As she watched her husband patiently guiding their daughter, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From abandonment and despair to love and security. From a broken wagon on the prairie to a thriving ranch and growing family. Mason looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile still capable of making her heart skip after all this time spread across his face as he waved. Emma, spotting her mother, called out excitedly, "Look, Mama, I'm riding." "I see you, sweetheart," Hannah called back, waving proudly. Later that evening, with Emma asleep and the ranch quiet under the starlit sky, Mason joined Hannah on their porch swing, placing his hand gently over hers on her belly. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Hannah leaned against his solid strength, content beyond words. "Completely," she replied. "Who would have thought that being left with a broken wagon would lead to finding everything I ever needed?" Mason pressed a kiss to her temple. Sometimes life's worst moments lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. As the baby kicked against their joined hands, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged with Mason, with Emma, with the new life growing within her, on this land that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving, but now felt like the only place she ever wanted to call home. The broken wagon that had once represented her abandonment had long since been repurposed, its wood used by Mason to build Emma's first bed. What had been an ending had become their beginning, all because a cowboy had ridden up and claimed them as his own.